her and introduce her in a bit, but first some logistics. Just so that you're all aware, this talk is being recorded and also live streamed on YouTube. If you do not wish to be recorded, please feel free to drop off the Zoom call and join our live stream on YouTube. And starting at 1 p.m. ET, or rather 1:05 p.m. ET, right after the break, there will be no recording. So feel free to come back after 1:05 p.m. ET if you do not wish to be recorded. So you can still come back because there will be no recording then. Okay, so with that, I think let me just start with a little bit of intro for those of you who are new here. We are the Trustworthy ML Initiative. So this is something that came very organically together as some of us were informally chatting about the lack of a community around trustworthy ML and topics like explainability, fairness, and adversarial robustness, and so on. So some of us just organically came together, and then we started thinking more, building the team. And I think today here we are after several months from the inception. We have several critical goals that we believe are extremely important for a community like Trustworthy ML, which is like a burgeoning field today. We believe a lot in providing easy access to resources, to especially to beginners and people who are new to the field. To this end, we have a curated list of tutorials, courses, papers, and so on our website. Please feel free to check it out. We also strongly believe in providing a platform for early career researchers. To this end, we have the Rising Star Spotlight Talks. Actually, our next edition of the talk series will feature some spotlight talks by PhD students. And we also have the Twitter highlight series. And then, of course, we always encourage discussion and debate around these topics thanks to our active Twitter handle. Please feel free to go to Twitter and follow us there as well. And the whole idea here is to build a community of researchers and practitioners that care about trustworthy ML. And beyond our other efforts, we are also focusing on bringing together some symposiums and workshops on these topics. Okay, so with that said, just a quick overview of the agenda today. So from 12 p.m. or a little later, since we are slightly past 12 p.m., but Celia Cintas from IBM Research Africa will be giving a talk until 12:40 p.m. Please submit your questions on the Zoom Q&A tool, upvote other questions, comment on the questions, and so on. If time permits, the speaker will stop periodically to answer some clarifying questions, and all the other questions will be taken towards the end of the talk. And then from 12:40 p.m. to 1 p.m., we'll have a moderated chat with the speaker where we'll discuss her journey into machine learning, her research process, and so on. We take a 5-minute break then, followed by a participant-driven discussion from 1:05 to 1:30 p.m. So that's the agenda for today. And with that, this is our speaker today that we have with us. She's Celia Cintas, who is a research scientist at IBM Research Africa. So she's a member of the AI science team at the IBM Research Kenya lab, and her current research is pretty fascinating and focuses on the improvement of machine learning techniques to address challenges on global health, particularly in developing countries, and also on problems like anomaly detection. And Celia has also been doing some amazing work on adversarial attacks and distribution shifts. So today she's going to talk more about her research. Over to you, Celia.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. So can you see my screen on full mode? Okay, super. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm super excited about the initiative. And of course, congratulations of pushing forward this type of community is super needed and helpful in the ML community overall. So today's presentation, I'm gonna be discussing some approaches that we have regarding pattern detection and how we can actually help already off-the-shelf trained machine learning models on detecting out of distribution samples and showing some other use cases. So just a quick outline of the presentation. First, I will introduce the team that makes possible all the research that we are carrying out here at the lab and at global level too. Then just motivate a little bit why we think studying pattern detection in this space is super helpful and what things had to add to the space. Particularly, I'm going to introduce what substance scanning is, that is the particular method that we use across different use cases. And also show how a similar approach showed some interesting insights in detecting adversarial attacks, both in image and audio, being able to detect fake content, and also how we tackle new class problem in skin disease models. Later on, some conclusions about where are in the work, what are some goodies that we can already use, and what things need some improvement. And also at the end, I would like to point out a few other papers for our team regarding fairness and machine learning applied to healthcare that I will not get to talk in this presentation, but definitely I think they are from interest to the community. So first of all, the team is formed by people across both two labs in your town, here in Nairobi. We also have collaborations with University of Minnesota, and all the work that I'm showing today is from our team with machine learning engineers, interns, and other researchers. Particularly for the Nairobi lab, our AI science team is led by Skylar Spigman, who is the expert on substance scanning. So first of all, I would like to some definitions that we use and how do we pose ourselves for our research topic. As it's the biggest space, I always like to start with clear denominations of what we are talking about. So for us, when I'm talking about anomaly detection in this presentation, is actually identified as singular anomalous samples. So this could be one node in one activation layer, or this could be one sample passing through the forward pass in a neural network. For us, in anomaly detection, we are looking for an obvious record once we identified it, and we have some prior knowledge of what are we looking for. What we want to extend in this work is actually thinking about identifying groups with patterns that are anomalous. This means that multiple samples are affected. This is not only one node in a layer, but actually multiple nodes that are having anomalous patterns. And when we pick them individually, there is only a slight anomaly pattern there. But when we see it as a group, we can find more significant systematic patterns there. And we have little or none idea of what the pattern will look like. So all this work that I'm going to present today has its foundation on linear time substance scanning. As you already maybe are thinking, okay, searching for groups in an activation space of current deep neural networks must be a pretty intensive work that it has an exhaustive compute time. But thanks to this property, we have a way to rank in the nodes that we're scanning, and actually fairly linear time, so we can scan these huge search spaces. So hopefully now you're interested on how to do pattern detection in a group-based manner, but I want to motivate why we should do these pattern detections in neural networks. So as we know, we have this naive assumption that when we train our model, the data distribution is going to be the same when we are evaluating or when the model is already in production. Sadly, in real life, that doesn't happen too often. So we actually need to, let's say, shield or aid our deep learning models to make sure that when we are trying to do some inference or some predictions, we actually know that the model can handle the input data that it's receiving. So as I mentioned before, in this presentation, I'm gonna talk about 3 use cases that we think are interesting to, sorry, let me hear. To pattern detection, to have a general approach to these different scenarios. One is adversarial attacks over both image and audio. How we detect in this particular phase is fake faces generated with gangs, and also the new class problem. What happened when my model receives a sample from a new type that wasn't classified on? So just a high-level overview. So when we say that we use subset scanning for anomalous pattern detection in the activation space, we are saying that we are not taking any particular neural network and we want to build an architecture to be able to detect out of distribution samples or adversarial attacks. We treat deep neural networks as data generating systems, and we apply the anomalous pattern detections over the activation data. So it's a source of data for this work. And we use subset scanning because we can efficiently search over this like combinational space to find the groups of the records that differ the most from what we expect will be quote unquote normal behavior. So some goodies that we can see of this type of approach is first, we can improve the detection of already trained models and runtime. So we think this is feasible when we are talking about models that are already on production or the training phase is over. Also, when we scan over the activation space, we can abstract a little bit about the data types. As we are only focusing on the deep representation of the data, we don't have problems handling audio, or it's going to be images or text or and so on. And another thing is that we don't need to retrain the model to actually improve the detection. And we don't need labels showing what an anomaly would look like or what a generated phase will look like and so on. We do, however, need that when we build this expected behavior of the networks to have a set of normal samples or samples that were trained with the model. So we know what expected behavior looks like. So our first assumption when we want to apply subset scanning in the activation space is that for us, activations from adversarial samples or perturbed samples or samples out of distribution have a different distribution of p-values that what we consider benign or clean samples. So for us, p-value is the proportion of background activations that are greater than the activation from the evaluation image. What this means is we have the expected activation distribution of background images that for us are the clean or what we expect to be normal for the deep learning model. And then we have another distribution of activations for the new sample that we want to test that we don't know if that test is going to be clean or perturbed or had any changes, as we don't have labels on that. So with subset scanning, we can quantify, we can detect and we can characterize what looks anomalous to us. But let's see first how we actually quantify this anomalousness. So for that, we use scattering functions. So when we pass an image through the network and generates activations, we can translate that to p-values, and we can measure how much those p-values deviate from uniform. So we are expecting that normal samples will have a uniform distribution, while anomalous ones would have a different or greater p-values there. So in this case, this is a KS test, but we have different scoring functions that we can use depending on the problem. Something to mention particularly to our deep learning approach is that we use non-parametric scanning statistics. And why is that? So subset scanning can handle parametric scoring functions like drawing from Poisson and so on. But we think that using non-parametric functions will give us the advantage of minimum assumption of what we expect the distribution will be like. So having these minimum assumptions will allow us to work across different type of layers, being able to process different activation functions before and after and so on. But that was scoring one image at a one given node. Now we need to think about the big picture and search space that we're looking for. So we can see these scoring functions and how they operate on a subset of nodes or activations. And we will search for the highest scoring subset of these nodes that again maximize the deviance from our uniform function. That for us will be the quantification of the anomalousness of the nodes that we're looking for. And you will hear me say across the presentation, group-based scanning, individual scanning. What I'm referring here is the search space. So when we say group-based scanning, basically I'm talking about we will search a group of images conditioned to a group of nodes. Whereas I say individual scanning is only one image passing through like a forward pass through all the different nodes. And what we're looking is the subset of nodes that are most anomalous for that given image. That was just a clarification. So now we discuss a little bit how we quantify or how we characterize the anomalousness of the sample. But let me give you a quick wrap up and step-by-step of the pipeline. So if you think that you have your already trained model and you have samples that you know that are clean that we're using during the training, how can you use subset scanning in your approach? So we already experimented across a lot of different architectures with different end goals for the models, from CNNs to recurrent neural networks, generative models, and so on. So basically the steps that we will do is we have to extract the activations of the network that you already have. First, we want to have the expected distribution of what the activation looks like in a normal process. And then we want to estimate the same distribution for our evaluation samples. We will do this at each layer. Of course, you can just choose if you have like domain knowledge of which type of layer are you looking for the anomalous patterns, but here for the experiments, we just go through the whole network. When we have our distributions of activations, again, we need to get this proportion and compute the empirical p-values. That here is where we will use our non-parametric scan function to be able to quantify the anomalousness. So what we do is here is identify the most anomalous subset on the evaluation samples. And again, these evaluation samples can have of everything. Can be clean, can be perturbed, can be new class, and so on. So what we get out of this pipeline is a subset score that will tell us the detection power of the method to flag a sample as anomalous or not. But something more interesting is actually give us back the nodes that contribute to that score. So it will not be one entire layer, the one responsible for an anomalous pattern, but rather a subset of the activations of that layer. And that will take us to other things like how can we explain the score that we're calculating, or how can we better characterize the samples. So I'm gonna do here the first use case. I think after the first application, I will stop to ask questions. But I think here on this part, you can see the outcome of all this process that we were talking about. So here, just a brief recap. If you're not aware of adversarial attacks, basically someone can perturb the input in a way that a human couldn't recognize, but it changes the prediction of a classifier. So you have two big families of this type of attacks. The one that has complete access to the model, the structure, the weights. And in the other hand, you have attacks that only use information from the output of the target model. This is just to show that all the testing that we did for both cases, images and audio, correspond to this type of adversarial node. And we also tested different levels of perturbation. So for this particular case, this is the work that was published on each guy on January this year. We use autoencoders because we already know that these structures are really good for detection of out of distribution, and also they are being used for adversarial attacks detection. So we thought that this was a good baseline to try to improve current methods regarding adversarial attacks. So another interesting thing is that we can get to scan the reconstruction space, and that will give us, having the inner layers and see the patterns there, the reconstruction space will give us a direct notion to the pixel space. So we can actually know which pixels trigger that sample to be marked as an anomalous. So first, when we run these across different adversarial attacks, different perturbations, and even noising the training process of the autoencoder, we see that in the first layers, we have our highest detection power. And as we move from the encoder to the decoder, we see that our capabilities go down. So one intuition behind this is the autoencoder is trying to map the new sample to the expected distribution. So we are losing adversarial pixels per se on the abstraction. So this is what a subset score looks like. These are the distribution from different type of samples. You can see, for example, the blue distribution is clean data, and then you can see the subset score distribution for different adversarial attacks. I think this is a first layer of vanilla autoencoder for fashion MNIST. So as much as we can diverge these distributions is how well our method is able to detect that there is something off with the sample that is processing. So another part that is interesting is how I mentioned is the reconstruction error. So here, these are heavily perturbed samples because we wanted to visually be able to see. But when we scan the reconstruction error, we find this interesting thing that is very easy to map back to the pixel space. So you can actually see the white pixels are showing the anomalous nodes that when something highlights there, is the image is flagged as adversarial. And it makes sense that it's always around the shape of the number and it's never over the structure. So things like exploiting information from which subsets were highlighted as anomalous give us this gateway to explainability. So as I mentioned at the beginning, a goodie was that we were able to process all these different architectures without caring about the input data. So Victor Akinwande was pushing adversarial attacks in audio. And this is a paper that it was in a KDD workshop. And something super interesting, a part that we can test that actually the method works in other domains and not the classical image setting, is that he found that most of the defending mechanisms, or the most predominant, were preprocessing techniques. So you're actually modifying the input data, like adding noise or smoothing, but these type of approaches tend to affect the performance of the benign samples. So we thought that it was interesting that we can get the same detection level of adversarial attacks in samples, and we don't perturb the image, or sorry, the audio, the input is not modified. So I will pause here just in case if we have any questions, otherwise I can continue.
I just had a quick question. You mentioned that the distributions are different in the initial layers, right?
Yes, those were on the autoencoder were the most easy to separate.
Right. So does that mean that the adversarial images are basically local in nature, because those the first initial layers of the network, they try to learn like simple features like edges and lines, right? So do you think
Exactly.
that's the
Like
reason?
yeah, like highly correlated, like locally correlated samples. Yeah, definitely. At the beginning, we thought when we got these results, we thought, okay, maybe we are perturbing too much the samples, and that picks up really quickly at the beginning. But then we curated the adversarial attacks. You can see the samples on additional data, and you will not notice any variation. But actually, what it pops at is these local features for the adversarial samples.
I see. That's interesting. Thank you.
So our second use case, and something before I forget, so everything that we did on adversarial attacks, it was always using individual scanning. So we were actually looking for the subset of nodes in a given layer and only passing one image through the model. Here I'm making that mention because here we see a huge increase in the performance when we actually look for group-based scanning. And that gives us a hypothesis that this synthesized content from these gangs leave a potential subtle but systematic trace in the activation space of how these samples are generated. But our key motivation here was now gangs are getting with a huge power to get very realistic samples, and they can generate these samples in high volumes and so on. So we thought that it was an interesting case. First, we be able to validate the data as if it was modified or not by the AI system, or even make sure that no model runs over this fake content. And when we were working on this, we had we explore different synthesis process. We did a bunch of different type of GANs, but also we care about total generation. So this means my vector noise is creating these amazing pictures, as you can see in the left. Or you are editing a part of the image, as you can see in the right with the star gun, that actually tweaks one attribute of the image, but actually the image as a whole is not from random noise. Similarly, we have some experiments on style transfer and so on. And again, we don't want to, and we cannot claim that this is a new method and it will is a new fake detector, but rather we want to see how can we improve the great work that is already out on deep learning models in a manner that there is no need for retraining, and there is something that we can do on runtime. So for testing here, we use both already pre-trained fake face classifiers that you were are using denseness or some known architectures. And we also tested over the discriminant of different GANs to test architectures to see how the performance varies. But definitely what we saw is that when you have these very realistic and they individually don't change that much the activation space of the models, group-based scanning is needed for a better performance for sure. But again, other thing that we tested is proportions. So how small can be in the group the data that is actually fake or generated, and how can we easily exploit that type of proportion or group-based patterns. This is under review, and our last use case, let's say, is also another work that is currently under review, but we thought that it was an interesting application too. So here is based on skin disease models. So we are looking to 2 out of distribution per se settings. First, we are looking for different clinical settings. You have your model trained, but then you go to different clinician institutions, and of course the hardware, how the sample is taken changes, even the environment, the illumination, and so on. So we wanted to test first if we were able to detect that type of changes. And the second one is my model was trained to classify 10 different diseases. But what happens is the new sample that I'm getting is from a new class that the model never saw. So those were the 2 settings that we were comparing here. And something that came out from our preliminary results here is first, when we talk about detecting the new class and detecting this new clinical setting, the detection of the method differs across layers. So definitely it's not the same, or the method doesn't perform the same when it tries to flag a new type of disease versus a picture that was taken in a different setting. That you can see, if you see the green and the yellow line, those 2 belong to a type of new disease that the model didn't saw during training. And the red one is a data set that was taken totally different from what the model was trained on. Another thing, apart from being able to detect properly this type of data, we were interested in to see how if the detection of these out of distribution samples in skin disease was performing equally across the population. So I will talk a little bit later, but we have a previous work that it was looking into fairness for skin tone classifiers. And something that we corroborate when we look at out of distribution is that also the skin disease datasets that are being used right now heavily lack of representation of darker skin tones. And that is why all the OOD samples will perform better in darker skin tones compared to those in light or intermediate skin tones. But also we can see that the sample size is small because we can see the variance of the AUC going across layers, while for light skin tones and intermediate, it holds the same. There is not that much variation. So these are some preliminary work that we are doing that we find interesting. Just like wrapping up again, we are not claiming at all to be experts on adversarial attacks detection or new class problem, but we do think there is some goodness on applying these general methods that can enhance the detection power. We can already use whatever was built and it was tested and have good performance, and we can just build on top of that. It's not another option that we're showing, but actually an enhancement that we can put there. And as is on runtime, we can do this in production, we can do afterwards training. And we are agnostic to the deep learning architectures that we use, because we're always looking at the output of the layer passing through the sample. But we are working on exploiting more the subsets of nodes that we get back from the score. So right now, most of the results that you saw is our subset score saying how good it can detect or differ samples. But we use a little bit on the reconstruction error space, and we are able to visualize that. But we have some ideas that maybe the subsets that appear anomalous in each layer differ from the source. So we are working on see if this subset of nodes can give us information. It's not that the sample is anomalous, but actually it looks like it comes from a generative process or comes from adversarial attacks and so on. Also, all the results that we show, we just scan through the whole network. But we know that depending the use case, there are some layers that are better picking up these anomalous patterns. So we are searching on ways that we can inform this, so you don't have to scan the whole network on runtime and just go to a particular layer. So all the code for subset scanning is part of the adversarial robustness toolbox that you can access. It's written in Python. That goes to Victor Akinwande that make an amazing job to getting everything ready there. And of course, Skylar helping us all the way. You can see the paper, and also just passing through, we have openings for master students that want to do an internship with the AI science team here in Kenya. Of course, it's going to be remote this year, but if you're interested in any of these topics, please do apply or get in touch with me. So some topics that I will not go through, but I think they worth to be put out there just in case you have questions or you want to reach out for collaborations and so on. Is first, regarding fairness, we have work done on dermatology. First, from the machine learning perspective, we wanted to see how classifiers are trained, how is the data distribution looks like, and if that actually impacts the performance. In the other hand, we started working with dermatology from Stanford University, and we are actually evaluating the fair representations in educational materials. So we're taking a step back. We are not looking to data that goes to models, but actually we look at data representation that is being used to taught dermatologists. Other interesting papers more related to healthcare are again, the foundation is based on subset scanning away from any type of network or neural network is not being used. Is a same idea, but other data types, and there are both focus on global health development. Thank you so much for your time. Hope I didn't went too fast. Please, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Celia. That was a wonderful talk. So I just had like one quick follow-up question before we go into the discussion part of this session. So I was wondering, so you talked a lot about distribution shifts and, you know, adversarial robustness and how it can be used to model distribution shifts and so on. So I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on thinking about causal shifts or interventional shifts and how we can model those or construct deep neural nets that are robust to those kinds of shifts, as well as you're thinking more broadly about distribution shifts.
Yeah, definitely. Not particularly my specialty area, but I do know that Victor and Skylar are heavily working on observational data studies, and they are using subset scanning to see these type of shifts. I think the first EMIA paper will do a nice landing to that topic, but not particularly me.
Got it. Okay. And what are your thoughts also on what are the most closest to sort of natural shifts, right? So if we were to think about this is how real world data would shift in, let's say, maybe a healthcare context, and which of these formulations would most closely model the real world shifts? Like any intuitions, often that is a topic that is not touched upon really when we think of machine learning literature. So I was just wondering if there is any intuition in terms of healthcare data, like what could be some real world shifts and how could they be modeled?
Yeah, definitely. I think a big topic is temporal shifts, right? And from the top of my mind, geography shifts. So you have this model trained for this population, and then you want to use same model or even tune for new settings. Also, we do push for clinical settings, because definitely it's not going to be the same for clinical settings in developing countries and first world countries. So the hardware that you will use for picking up the samples, or even the environment where you work on, will differ a lot. So at least in our view, for skin disease models, training models on their most topic samples, and then expecting to perform on their I don't know, smartphone pictures,
Mhm.
it's a big gap that we need to be aware of, definitely.
Right. Awesome. Thank you so much once again. And with that, I think there's one more question from the audience that just came up. So Louise asks, could you explain a bit more what heuristics you derive from your results of the Ichkai 2020 paper for using subset score distributions to categorize data?
So for the adversarial attacks, so first, where the anomaly appears, at the beginning was odd, but then we started running some experiments on actually how the information flows through the autoencoder.
Mhm.
So one insight, it was that the patterns that we can find also are attached to the information flows
Mhm.
that passes through. Also, that we do see an overlap on a few couple of adversarial attacks. So we
Mhm.
have similar scores.
Mhm.
So at least at that first layer that I show you, we can say that it's an adversarial attack, but we will not have the capabilities of saying, okay, this is this type of attack.
Mhm.
Definitely that should happen in another layer or with other information. So we can say that something is wrong there, but we cannot say what type of perturbation was done to.
Okay.
Other insights on the paper. Definitely when we wanted to scan the reconstruction error, we are highly tied to the performance of the autoencoder.
Mhm.
So we were saw that for poorly trained autoencoders, we are still be able to extract detection power in inner layers, but actually in the reconstruction space goes down. And if you think about it, it's because the reconstruction difference is going to be huge there. So for having insightful information in the reconstruction error, we needed to guarantee that the autoencoder was properly trained.
Right. Yeah. So there is also, I think, a follow-up question along with the same thing, which says, did you also do tests how the distribution looks for different subsets of the clean data? As far as I know, sometimes weird, funny things can happen when using activation distributions as a proxy for anomaly.
Yes. So the scores that you see over is across all the different subset of nodes.
Mm-hmm.
So something that we did is to mitigate that type of funny side effects on activations is use, this was mainly for the generative work. We use an scoring function called high criticism, that what it does is it returns a way smaller subset of nodes. So it penalizes harder what we think that anomalous is. And with that type of penalization, we lose a lot of noisy activations that we can get.
Awesome. Thank you so much once again for the chat and answering these questions. So now we'll jump into the discussion part of the session. So maybe we can start off by chatting a little bit about your background. So I see that your career has spanned various countries. So if you could just give a brief overview of your education and all the places that you have like lived in, worked at, studied at, I think maybe we can start from there.
Super. Yeah, so I'm Argentinian, born and raised, particularly from Patagonia, from the south. So I did my undergrades and PhD in Argentina. Actually, the university was in Buenos Aires, in Bahia Blanca, but in Argentina we have something that I'm very proud of, is a great research ministry and research organization. So you can actually, you do your PhD in a university, but you work in a research center that in this case was the Patagonia Research Center. And my PhD work was very interesting as challenging because it was an interdisciplinary group. So actually you have to balance the expectations of the computer science degree, but also, you know, having impact and working on trying to understand complex problems or settings. So I had a one advisor in computer science and one advisor in anthropological biology studies.
Okay.
So in the team, it was biologists, you have statisticians, you have anthropologists, social biology angles, and I was the first computer science PhD student in the team. So it was a super interesting process, and also give us perspectives that I don't think we have only in the ML area. So I think that was very rewarding. During my PhD, our lab collaborated with UCL, with the genetics department. So I got to spend time during my PhD there. And also after the PhD defense, I got to visit Universidad de Jaén in Spain, and we work on applications for heritage. So it was more archaeological side of life that I also learned a lot and got a lot of views. Then I was gonna start back the postdocs. There were a few options, and then Aisha, the healthcare manager of the Kenya lab, contacted me because I was in the database for Grace Hopper conference. I was a scholar there, so the CV was there, and we started discussing of applications that we can do with my background on healthcare. And it was fascinating to me because bordering surreal, because in Argentina, at least in my academic group sphere, there is a lot of connections to work with US teams, to work with Europe and do interactions, but it's not so easy to collaborate with researchers between, say, Latin America and the African continent. So I thought that was getting to know the amazing researchers that work here, get to work with them. I think it was like a one-time opportunity, and that is how I ended up here. First was a postdoc, and then I moved to a research position. So I think that was kind of both.
Awesome. Okay. So, can you share some details about what motivated you to work in this broad area of trustworthy ML? What are the things that get you most excited about this area?
So I think is first getting to to understand the complexity of the problem. So I think in machine learning areas, we simplify that much the problem, so we can actually build a solution, right? And it works, and till the paper, it's fine. You will get the paper out, you will benchmark against everything. But then trying to move it to actually help decision makers or actually have an impact, that's a big leap that we cannot take on the current state of machine learning. We cannot take this super curated model research and put it into real world, because it's naive to expect that it's gonna work properly. Just thinking about different clinical settings in my own country in different states will change it drastically, and just in the same country. So I think what motivates me here is, of course, is the research part of better understanding how the information flows in these deep neural networks, trying to get out in more explainable or characterization of what is happening, but also being realistic and actually embrace the complexity of the setting if you want to deploy something sometime. So I would say those two.
Got it. And you have also been focusing on problems that touch upon challenges in developing countries. So we are curious to know a little bit more about, beyond the things that we often think in the landscape of like a country like US and so on, what other additional challenges are posed when you think of similar problems, but in the context of developing countries?
That's a good question. So first I will say, uh, adapting like general methods, general models, adapting to any local context is a huge leap. In, I will say, the type of data that is used. So you will see US or Europe, you will see heavy, high quality CT scans. But I don't know how many of those you will get in other developing countries. And if your models are trained on that, eh, even we have to stop like in the data part, because we don't have that type of data structure. Um, on the other hand, I think it's the requirements or the needs that that an MD has here or back at home are way different as the needs that medical help can have in other more countries. So the ratio of medical to patients is super tiny. So you have a bunch of doctors and they will have to take care of tons of and thousands of patients. So the requirements of the things that we can assist that people are way different than a medical that, I don't know, has a more restricted set of patients per se. And even, you know, the population layout, like the diseases that you want to treat, what is the you know, is I always like, so these are very complex. You know, you cannot think of health without thinking about culture, without thinking about income, without thinking about so many other angles, that trying to fit everything in one box is tricky. But I do believe that I will not push to people to say, take my method, just implement it on the ground. I'm already happy if I have an understanding of the problem and the scope of the complexity. Even if we don't get to deploy, at least you have the understanding on how complex the setting is. And that's the first step. And then you notice that you cannot do this alone. You cannot be a machine learning practitioner, develop something and just go. You actually need to co-create with the main experts, with people with other interdisciplinary areas to actually build something that can be used. So yeah.
Awesome. So, what advice would you give to someone who is, let's say, starting their PhD just now in this broad area of trustworthy ML? What would you tell them about what skills they might need to pick up, how to approach problems, and so on?
So it can be daunting right now. I is such a huge space now, and so many conferences and so on. So it's a huge space to work on. That's for sure. That's exciting. Something that I will look for is if you're in a PhD program and everyone is from computer science or mathematical backgrounds, and you don't have the access to have coworkers that are from other science, just reach out to other areas. I will guarantee that the diversity of topics will help you a lot. I think um, so building stuff alone and then see if the domain expert likes it never works. You have to include the person that is going to be using you know the people that are developing the theories or even the practices should be as diverse as the users. So I will put a lot of effort to get a diverse team for sure at the beginning. And 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 on the paper output there is so much right now, so teaming up with other PhD students to have lecture groups that you can actually go and somebody will read a paper and they can talk about it. So the high throughput that we have paper is impossible to catch up. So I think team up and split the work, and you can get to absorb a lot of knowledge and in that way.
Got it. Okay, and maybe we'll end this discussion with this last question on what your research process is like. So, if you were to like just start at this point thinking about, okay, what should I work on next? What are the different steps in the process? How do you pick problems? How do you go about solving them? And ultimately finishing a project?
So I think there are two sides. So if you can have the problem driven approach. Somebody comes here from other domain and they say we have this problem. Do you think there is some way that we can help? That's very driven, that you have clear goals, and you have to interact a lot. Research process will be you will have some educated guess on what can work and can't work. uh, Definitely check what is already there. Don't try to use the same hammer. Not everything is the same. Definitely just see what is out there. Reach out to the researchers. If you think that there is one paper that is perfect for you, reach out to the authors. Most of them are happy to talk about the topic, so I'm sure that will help. And 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 even and so when you have problem driven, the hypothesis is clear because it's written by somebody else. But definitely when you start experimentation on what can work, what cannot work, don't I will say don't try to always get the best score. If something pops up weird in your results, you just have to talk to with the domain expert. Trying to hide bad results is bad policy. Bad results are good results anyway, because now you know that doesn't work. So I will always be transparent of what doesn't work, because in our community sometimes we are very driven to outperform a state of the art, having metrics and so on. So we lost the perspective that actually when something doesn't work, that's super informative too. I think that will be.
So great. Thank you so much for joining us, Celia. So, with that, we are going to go for a few minutes of break. So, we'll reconvene back around, I think it's 1 3 now. So, maybe around like 1 7 p.m., just for 4 minutes, 4 to 5 minutes. And then once we are back, we'll have this participant driven discussion where it's a free form discussion. All of the participants will be part of the call and are welcome to engage, brainstorm, talk about any of the things that Celia discussed in her talk today, or also just other aspects of Trustworthy ML. Thank you so much for joining us.